And now, this.
Okay, let's go. Harry Tracy.
Harry Tracy! Trigger warning. The following contains the authentic accounts of factual historical figures and events. If historical information may upset you, then please withdraw now. Retreat.
Well, I guess you know who I am.
Harry Tracy is a true story. This telling is authored from sources spanning over 120 years. All characterized quotations are verbatim from interviews, newspaper articles, and testimonials taken at the time. Scott Martinez. Part 4. Murder. This Harry Tracy and David Lant escaped from the Utah pen last fall and have been on the move ever since. A few days in a place and fear of capture forces them to move on and keep moving. Justice of the Peace, James H. Hoy.
The Hoy brothers, leaders of the law and order crowd.
James Hoy was the brother of Valentine S. Hoy, who would later be murdered by Harry Tracy. Deputy U.S. Marshal Perry L. Young encountered Harry Tracy and David Lant on December 2nd by Taylor Mountain.
Look into Winchester's thrilling experience of Deputy Marshal Young. David Lant, an escapee from the state prison, and two comrades stand up to the officer near Vernal.
Freshly escaped from prison, Harry Tracy and David Lant became cornered in the Lodore Canyon of the Browns Hole area of Colorado.
Harry Tracy and David Lant, members of the Powder Springs gang of outlaws.
Their big mistake was meeting up with a couple other outlaws, Pat Johnson and Judge Bennett. Judge Bennett was not a real judge. His name was Jack, and he'd met Butch Cassidy in prison. We never considered that he belonged to the Cassidy gang proper. The number of outlaws operating from these headquarters variously estimated from 50 to 500. He was a member of the hanger-on gang that followed around and got the crumbs after Cassidy and the bunch had cut the loaf. It was with these hanger-on gang members that Tracy and Lant joined forces, two of the most marginal members of the Wild Bunch. Pat Johnson and Judge Bennett wanted for the recent shooting of a young man named Willie Strang, the first of several murders that would shake the community. Judge Bennett was selected to meet back up with Johnson and Lant and Tracy near Douglas Mountain. It was decided that it was best if it was Bennett who went for supplies. There was an open warrant for Bennett and Johnson both on cattle rustling, but it was Johnson who had just shot young Willie Strang at the ranch house of a local named Valentine Hoy. Willie Strang, a playful teen, pulled a chair out from underneath Johnson, a prank he'd pulled before. Johnson, out of anger or his own idea of a prank, pulled out his pistol and put a bullet in the boy's spine. Willie died soon after. Valentine Hoy led the posse of men that came looking for Pat Johnson, and he found David Lant and Harry Tracy as well. Browns Park, Utah, February 20th, 1898. Dear Sir, I have just received word that Willie Strang was shot last Tuesday morning by one P.L. Johnson at my ranch on Red Creek, Wyoming. These excerpts from a letter written by Valentine Hoy in his own hand. The killing was a cold-blooded affair, and no expense should be spared to punish Pat Johnson for the cowardly deed. The letter was written just 9 days before Harry Tracy gunned Valentine Hoy down. One John Bennett is supposed to be in his company. This John Bennett is wanted. He stole the boy's horse after they killed him. The body has been prepared for burial, awaits a coroner's inquest, and wishes of the boy's parents. The people over here are around to immediate action to rid the country of these desperate characters. Yours truly, Valentine S. Hoy. Almost 50, Valentine was the oldest of 4 local brothers and 1 sister. Hoy was a Civil War veteran with the Union Army, a rancher, a miner, and a cattleman. Valentine declared he wanted no business with Harry or land, but he was determined to bring Johnson to justice. Harry Tracy wasn't having any of it.
Stop where you are, Hoy. You come one step closer and I will kill you, deader than hell.
Hoy would not back down.
Johnson shot Willie Strang, and we're gonna hang him higher than a kite.
You are not gonna take Johnson or anyone else.
Keep out of this, Tracy. It's none of your affair.
Hoy kept coming, and Harry shot.
Harry Tracy, a bad man,
It was Harry Tracy's bullet
but a great shot.
that set off a series of events ending the safe havens of the Outlaw Trail.
The region near the center of which the corners of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming come together has recently been the scene of bold and desperate deeds of outlawry that have excited great indignation in all 3 of the states named. The murder of the boy Strang and the more recent killing in cold blood of Hoy are crimes that call for swift vengeance.
The walls of Lodore Canyon rise 2,000 feet on the both sides of the Green River. The mountains are precipitous. He was there, under the shadow of that great rock, for 48 hours.
An awful murder has been committed here today. V.S. Hoy was shot dead by a party of outlaws and murderers in the rocks of Lodore Canyon. He lies where he fell.
It was impossible to bring the dead man's body down the way he went up.
This strip of country is rugged and broken and almost impregnable by a stranger, and abounds in caves, deep gorges, and strongholds from which it is impossible to dislodge the outlaws who have trails unknown to any except themselves.
James Hoy. Hunting men in a thickly settled country or on the plains or open country is one thing, but to hunt them in these mountains, snow-capped in sections the year round, cut by impassable canyons, unfordable rivers, gulches, gullies, and where nearly every section of land affords a hiding place is another proposition. James Hoy's point about the familiarity of the terrain was as salient as it would be later when tracking Tracy in the great woods of the Northwest.
Might as well just send a lot of schoolboys to do the work, or get lost, or killed themselves. If these outlaws are to be gotten rid of, it will be done by men living here, or men knowing the country and acting in concert with resident citizens of good reputation. The citizens of Browns Park have made up their minds that that section shall no longer be used by criminals and fugitives from justice as a hiding place.
More than 60 legally sworn in and armed men swarmed the hills on horseback, all on the hunt for the men who murdered Valentine Hoy. Most unfortunately for Judge Bennett, he was oblivious. When he arrived at Douglas Mountain, he discharged his pistol 3 times, a signal to meet back with Johnson, Lant, and Tracy. But he was captured and taken to the Bassett Ranch house.
Mommy, look at the funny men.
Josie Bassett McKnight and her small son Crawford watched as 7 men with hastily made masks lynched a struggling Judge Bennett.
An outlaw lynched! He weakened when the mob took him and begged piteously. Bennett was so handy with a gun that he thought that no man or set of men dared to attempt to arrest him.
Deward Campbell.
They stood him up in a springboard buggy, put the noose around his neck. The drop was too short to break Bennett's neck, and for 3 or 4 minutes he danced a lively jig in midair, gyrating and pirouetting grotesquely. Then there was one less troublemaker in Browns Park. The shooting of young Willie Strang, the murder of respected rancher Valentine Hoy, the lynching of Judge Bennett, and the formation of posses from 3 different states brought an abundance of publicity. The gang of outlaws now pursued by the posse is a small detachment of the greatest organized band of thieves and murderers ever rendezvoused in the West.
In actuality, the 3 freezing fugitives had managed one scant meal from the one horse they'd stolen away with, cutting its hide into strips to reinforce their worn-out shoes, their bleeding feet leaving tracks in the snow. Joe Davenport, a member of the posse, later recalled,
Tracy and Lant ran ahead, but Johnson, cowardly to the core, turned and walked towards us with his hands raised.
Tracy and Lant holed up in a small, snow-filled gulch. So hopeless was the situation that Lant threw up his hands in defeat and began to surrender to the posse.
Hell! Lant started to surrender. Tracy pulled his gun on him and threatened to kill him.
You get back here, you son of a bitch, or I will blow your head off.
The standoff persisted, deadlocked. The wind grew, the cold set in.
But finally, both submitted to the inevitable and threw up their hands.
If my partners had stayed with me, the officers would have killed us, or we would have frozen to death right here.
Extra! Extra! Details of the capture!
Gents, give me a cup of coffee, a fresh horse, and 25 yards head start, and I won't bother you no more.
James Hoy convened a preliminary hearing at the nearby Bassett Ranch House. It was March 5th, 1889.
Which one of you killed my brother?
Well, one of us here did it.
The three outlaws and murderers of Valentine S. Hoy and Willie Strang are captured and lodged in jail according to law.
Harry Tracy and David Lant were being held at Hans Peak Jail in separate cells, but not for long. On March 4th, 1889, they escaped. Harry Tracy asked Sheriff Neiman, who'd been part of the posse, for a match before stepping into his cell. David Lant, whose door had been left open, or Lant knew how to spring it, beat Sheriff Neiman senseless, and then he released Harry Tracy.
Harry Tracy and David Lant escape Hans Peak, beat Sheriff Neiman.
The two stripped, bound, and gagged Neiman, and then left with the keys. Neiman, badly beaten, was a determined man himself and declared he was not too hurt to join the posse, then mounting to hunt for the fugitives yet again. South of Steamboat Springs, Tracy and Lant, two unarmed, freezing fugitives, discarded two stolen and tired horses, then hailed the Hans Peak to Walcott Daily sleigh, passing in the dim light of the breaking morning, and they climbed aboard. There they found a revolver pointed squarely at them, and behind it, the blackened eyes and still bloodied face of Sheriff Neiman.
Sheriff Neiman, I would not have thought you'd have been up this early.
Sheriff Neiman and his deputy, Milby Frazier, bought chains and padlocks and chained his prisoners by the neck. Harry Tracy and David Lant were transferred to Aspen to be lodged in the Pinkton County Jail. On April 10th, the Aspen Times reported,
The outlaws are two about as desperate-looking men as Pinkton County's jail has ever harbored. The jail is one of the most secure in the state and will be next to an impossibility for a prisoner to escape from it without receiving help from the outside, which, of course, will be carefully guarded against.
And the Aspen Times was quickly proven wrong. Shortly after 5 p.m. on June 22nd, David Lant struck Aspen jailer Bob Jones in the head with an iron poker. Jones, who also worked as the courthouse janitor,
Hey, I held my own in that fight, and it took Tracy joining in to best me.
Tracy and David Lant, escaped convicts from Utah, had more nerve.
Harry Tracy and David Lant had escaped for the third time.
Tracy and Lant are desperate men, and Sheriff Fisher is fortunate indeed that he was not shot down.
There remains no substantiation of what became of David Lant past his headlining exploits with Harry Tracy. After that, David Lant effectively disappeared. No death was ever recorded and no body ever found. He left behind only lore. Stories like David was shot by Tracy before they parted ways, or that Lant later became a war hero, or that he served a long prison sentence under another name. The book The Vanished Outlaw presents a strong case that David Lant went on to live a long and quiet life under an assumed alias, David Stillwell. Stillwell. The point is germane in consideration to what is reported to have happened to Harry Tracy's next partner in Portland, Oregon, David Merrill. Merrill, who Tracy would report he shot in a private duel, was found weeks later, a corpse with no face.
The face is unrecognizable.
100 years of Browns Park and Diamond Mountain documents compelling material declaring that David Lance survived as a quiet loner, leaving behind an estate consisting of a sheep wagon, a 4-horse team, and 2 saddles when he, then named David Stillwell, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound May 4th, 1947. Harry Tracy went west, broke incarceration a 4th time, became the subject of a massive manhunt, then died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Madman Tracy does bloody work. Last of the Western bad men.
So if you watch that whole video, you're pretty cool.
The preceding was one part of a 9-part project. To watch the next part, click here. Or to view the entire Harry Tracy documentary, click here. Well, that's just damn good news.